back, everybody. It is the Working Brother back at you with another talk. Again, we've got George McMillan III. How you doing, George? Welcome back.
I'm doing great. I'm thrilled to be here as always.
As always, it is excellent to have you back. We've got a plethora, one could say, of comedic topics to cover today. We've got some slides for those who like slides. We've got memes for those who like memes. And we've got some random news events and even links sent in by subscribers in chat. George, do you have any preference as to what you'd like to get into first?
Wait, we have subscribers?
Well, I do. Technically,
Oh.
That's what they're called these days. I don't like the term, for the record.
Right.
I think it's, well, I'll get into that maybe in one of the tail videos that I'll get to eventually. For everybody who's new here, hi, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Dislike if you dislike, and don't forget, this is a comedy show. Nothing we say here has anything to do with reality. So, speaking of jokes, this is not a joke. Well, it was.
We find it amusing, though.
It does have some comedic potential, right?
Yeah, it does.
What's your take on what happened in these free and democratic fair elections in the West, the beginning and the end of the West, the border of the West, once?
Yeah, that's what's disturbing is the East-West divide. I have to say this very carefully, but what's disturbing is Schultz has more backing than he really should have. But we'll see. But it is, I don't know.
Did you hear Orban talk about the fall of the Berlin Wall? Have you ever heard Orban speak about it?
It shifted, as far as on the continuum, because Schultz is far left, so it shifted towards the center and the center right. It actually shifted a little bit more, in my opinion. If you want to save Germany before it deindustrializes, was what I'm saying. But
what do you mean before?
Totally
the premise of talks we did like 2 years ago is that it already happened. Then people just haven't realized. And wasn't it? Is it VW or Mercedes? I think it's VW who's like closing all their factories in Germany or something like that.
Yeah, I guess they're closing a lot of them. I mean, someone just sent them that note. I kind of stopped tracking that because I got too many other things. Because we war gamed it 2 years ago that if Germany was either going to open up the other two Nord Streams or go out of business, because their industry couldn't, without cheap Russian gas, they would go out of business. We did the 6 power center. Whoever's connected to cheap Russian gas, their industrial products are going to get cheaper vis-a-vis everybody else in the world. And those who don't get connected to it, their products are going to become more expensive and less competitive. And Germany was either going to open up Nord Stream or move their businesses closer to where they can get affordable energy. And then Nord Stream miraculously blew up. So somebody did not want Nord Stream voted on as the elections were coming up, because that's ultimately what the elections were about. So
do you think this is Putin's influence and propaganda that caused this kind of election, or do you think it's Merkel's, because she's secretly KGB from back when she was actually KGB?
Well, there's a joke in there somewhere. But we're not gonna discuss that. I mean, if she needs to become a KGB agent that can actually understand the price of energy per unit. That would be better. But yeah, with Nord Stream blowing up, they have to reload. We realized 2 years ago that they were going to either reopen it up or they're going to have to move their industry. So it got blown up because somebody wanted to stop. They didn't want the German electorate to vote on that. So it was to preempt the Russian electoral process, which is why the Nord Streams blew up. Because the West does not, it doesn't matter where let me put it this way. It doesn't matter where the pipelines blow up. The West, since the 1960s or again, since the Reagan administration, has never wanted Russian gas pipelines to go to Western Europe and then Western Europe to eventually pay in rubles. So it doesn't matter where they blow up, it's to stop natural gas from going to an end user in Western Europe and the end user paying in rubles. That's what it's about, protecting their alliance structure and then protecting the American dollar. Now, the problem with that is they could end up losing both in the long run anyway. What Washington and London has tried to stop is if German industry connects to cheap Russian gas, then they form an alliance. Yeah, we talked about it in the Pamisi dime analysis, where if you infrastructurally and informationally connect, the I, then you economically connect, then you diplomatically and militarily connect. So one integration leads to another. We went over those videos with was it Ambassador Mark Goodman, I think it was, in the DW videos, that was saying there's a school of thought that says if the more economically integrated a country gets, they become more diplomatically and militarily integrated. Well, it's Pamisi dime analysis is your, national instruments of power measurements is what you call that. So, and that's what the sea power versus land power doctrines have gotten into. The original Mahan sea power doctrine was about stopping naval ships, because you don't want people to export what they have plenty of to get money and then buy things that they need to further economic development. So you get Corbett came in the next generation and said, well, now we have trains, so the change in technology, people aren't so dependent upon sailing ships. Now they can deliver goods over land, so sea powers are losing some of their status. And then, the West was Spikeman theory, tried to get more into forming alliances to stop overland integration. So this would start out with railroads, and then it gravitated towards pipelines. So with being able to move goods by pipeline to Western Europe, well, what do? The U.S. moved NATO east, where the pipelines originate, and then a war just magically broke out in Ukraine after the stunning 2014 Euromaidan election. But we're not going to tell anybody to watch Ukraine on Fire by Oliver Stone, because that's just Stone's conspiracy theorist. So whatever, people do not watch Ukraine on Fire.
Don't watch that. Don't subscribe here. Just turn off. Don't look up. Above all, don't look up. I think there's even a movie about it. George, I've got a complaint for, technically it's a complaint.
Just one?
Well, it's three, but it's wrapped into one.
Okay. All right.
It's like the Holy Trinity of complaints.
All right. We'll go for it.
In one of our older videos, UK military intel propaganda, the 7Ps, we talked about all kinds of things. And a subscriber, there were three things that you said that triggered them. Let's put it that way. Enough that they felt they needed to tell me that things that you presented weren't exactly true from a person who grew up in the Soviet Union's perspective. So the three things, and I'm going to play the sound bites in a bit, but the three things are: socialism's goal is a single mother family so that the state can raise her children. B, the USSR was 2-3 generations behind the West technologically, driving reverse engineered Yugos and Trabants. And C, as such, people wanted change, and the comment is like, no, they didn't, which was outlined by that referendum that led to the breaking up of the Soviet Union, where 80% or something. We have the figures. I'll flash it up on screen.
Yeah.
But they didn't actually want the breakup. It was enforced on them. So these are like three premises where.
I didn't talk about the United States breaking up. The East Bloc broke up on their own. I wasn't talking about the Soviet Union at all. And when I talk about Marxism, what Marxist ideology is, it's way different than how the communist leaders actually implement it. It doesn't matter which country. You have Marxist theory in the books as it's written. And then whatever Lenin and Stalin or Mao or Pol Pot, however they implement it, is never anything like the book. It always gets implemented way differently. So when I talk about Marxism, each leader applies it differently, and they take some of it and they discard some of it. And it's different for each one. But what Marxist thought is supposed to do is designed to change Western Europe. Marx thought that capitalism was going to collapse in, somewhere in the late 1800s. He was really hoping it was going to collapse and he was going to become in charge. But it didn't. What happened was, he thought the workers of the world were going to unite, throw off the Christian capitalist leaders, and move to communism. After Archduke Ferdinand was shot in Sarajevo, well, all the workers of the world united with their monarchs, and they fought against each other. So nothing what Marx originally thought or planned to take charge of occurred. During World War I, Germany sent Lenin and Trotsky and all those people on a train to St. Petersburg, never thinking that the Bolsheviks were actually going to succeed, and they actually did succeed. Then how Lenin and Stalin actually start implementing communism in a different area is way different than what Marx and Engels were actually trying to do in England and Western Europe.
So what you're saying? What you're saying is the Soviet Socialist Union, USSR, did not implement the extremist Marxist ideas, goals that you had referred to in the last talk. Is that what you're saying?
They did some of it. But every time, Marxism is supposed to be a universalist ideology where you get rid of all religion and ethnic identities and you go into one big melting pot. Mm-hmm. So they were going to try to do this in the Soviet Union by getting rid of the different religions and teach statism is what you'd be teaching. Then they're going to do, they did the collectivist form, projects in Russia, and they did them in Ukraine. Now, of course, the Bolsheviks were mainly of a particular ethnicity themselves. So if you read Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, you'll know what I mean.
Thank you to everyone who's bought me a coffee, by the way.
Yeah.
This channel is demonetized. Nothing we say here has anything to do with reality, and this is a comedy show.
Yeah.
George,
So-
I'm gonna play. Wait. Before you continue, just so everybody who might not have been up to date with everything that we've talked about before gets an idea of what we're talking about. And so maybe refresh your memory as well and mine. I'm gonna play the 3 sound bites with the timestamps that were sent to me, and then I'm gonna let you continue with your take. Hold on, where's the mute? There it
Freudian
is.
life stages to adulthood. Well, then it's going to be the school system. So then you're making the school teachers the parents. So the ultimate goal of socialism is to replace the parent P. And again, since you're taking the school teachers come from the university system, you're training the university system and how to obliterate all 7 Ps and transform them. Then they go into the school system and they start raising kids to be socialist, spouses in common and children is the common is the catchphrase in Marxist anthropology. So that's what you're trying to raise kids, on, that it should not be a patriarchal society. Yeah, let's end it there and go back to the next one. So those are the 7 Ps and why they exist.
That was the first clip.
Yeah.
This is the second one.
Detail. At some point we'll probably, I still got the slide sets. We'll go over it again. All Russia needs to do, and China, is just sit back and let the West collapse on its own.
That
Just
I agree
like
with.
during the Reagan administration, all they had to do was sit back and watch the Soviet Union crumble.
That's
The United
part
States
that's
was advancing
iffy.
its technology, 2 or 3 generations before the Russians could reverse engineer the technologies. So they were falling farther and farther behind, both in commercial, civilian technology. I mean, people are still driving those Trabants and those Yugos that are, or whatever they were. There's a whole bunch of those cars that were built in the designed in the 1930s, and in the 1990s they're still driving them.
So that's the second part where the disagreement is that basically that claim that technology was backwards and not available is a little how should I say, propagandized. Let's hear the third timestamp quote, and then we'll get back to
that first paragraph, because it's to say that, and Engels
go on.
to say that Russian technology was anywhere close to U.S. technology in the 80s is completely nuts. Yes, the Soviet Union they produced a lot of great mathematical geniuses, theoretical mathematicians. They produced a lot of great ones. After the 90s, well, even into the 2000s. Yeah, I meet these people all over the place at game theory conferences. Well, before I started working in the Middle East, when I used to go to the game theory conferences. The big thing about what drove the West and what the French had been complaining about for, 60s and 70s, and the United States started complaining about the French backing certain businesses to be competitive. We were saying, well, that's too much state interference, and what the French said back to the United States was, well, you're funding your military industrial complex, which is funding cutting edge technology, and they're actually right. So we were saying that they shouldn't be subsidizing our industry, And France says, well, no, you guys are subsidizing your industry by massively funding the electronic engineering schools. And they were actually right. After World War II, the United States massively funded computers for the Manhattan Project, communications from Bletchley Park, and building computers for the aerospace industry. And well, of course, if you're funding it for communications, you're really funding it for code breaking. That's what you're trying to fund it for. So they were building computers were built for those services. It was never built for consumer use. It was built for military use. So if you take that as an example, it's a good way to then, figure out what was occurring, how Western technology accelerated so much faster than Soviet technology. It's because the military will pay for cutting edge technology, and then it goes to the generals who say, well, we like this product better than that, we're going to buy that. So they buy something, so they get a first consumer preference feedback loop is done. After that technology matures, the next people to buy it is the big companies themselves. Then as the products get better, then the elites always like to buy cutting edge technology for themselves. So then that technology ends up in their consumer products. And then after they find out, who likes that or what technologies people actually like, then Wall Street will throw in, again, it's the big elites and the big companies will throw in $50 million or $100 million to build a factory to mass produce that technology and make it so you can buy it at Walmart. Cell phones weren't made for consumer use. They're made for military communications.
You mean they're being used for military communications?
No, they always were. If it wasn't for U.S. DoD, these things would not exist. Flat screens weren't invented for. We
discussed this long time ago. We discussed this long time ago, if I'm not mistaken. How the product cycle goes for military.
I'm going through it again because your audience person doesn't understand what you're talking about. Flat screens are made to go in fighter cockpits, where space is really a premium. When you get into the integrated circuits, it's originally invented by Bell Labs and Texas Instruments. The different phases of it with Shockley and those people when they started building them way back in the 60s and went away from vacuum tubes. So it was all that was government funded research, even through Bell Labs. Because they had a monopoly on everything.
We've had a lot of Russian propaganda, even time traveling Russian propaganda. But recently, you're starting to smell of American propaganda, man. Like I think you've been in Texas for too long, man.
Just let me finish. So they were getting so many cycles ahead. Gorbachev wanted to switch to a market-based system because. In the 1980s, because China had already left the centrally planned non-market system in the early 70s. So they had already gone back to a market-based system and started allowing private property again. Well, between Brezhnev and Khrushchev, they started making some of those changes also. By the time Gorbachev came into power and Reagan started really accelerating with Star Wars, the Russians were getting farther and farther behind in technology. So
You mean like they were behind in the space race?
Yeah, well, hold on a second. We're talking about I want people to see how the feedback loop system works. and figure out why the technology is wider spread in Western Europe. Remember, I said Russia produces a ton of theoretical mathematicians. The problem is, are they making the best use of them? Is the system let them produce to the extent that they can produce?
I think you misspoke. Now you said Russia. You meant to have said USSR, like back then. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So these technologies that are being developed are dual use technologies. When Reagan was pushing for Star Wars, it's not necessarily having satellites in space that can actually be utilized to shoot down other people's satellites. It's all the learning that goes into create those technologies, create the materials that then spin off. So then, decades or 20 years later, civilians start getting these technologies. Well, that was between 1945, 1950, and 1960. That cycle of where it goes from a tactical product and goes through the where the military buys it, then the big companies buy it, then the super rich that run the big companies buy it, then they mass produce something so it becomes a consumer product. Say that was taking 15 years between in the 40s and 50s. Well, I think by the time Reagan was president, I think that cycle was occurring every 6 years. Now, some people are saying that's probably occurring every 4 years. So there's no way that Russia, or the Soviet Union, I should say, because it's a different system now, was able to cycle through products that quickly. Because also you have a resource allocation problem. Because if you go to the socialist calculation debates of Mises and Hayek in the 20s, when the problem with socialism is if you don't have a market product, if you don't have a free market allocation system, then how are you allocating resources? Well, ultimately, they tried to do it by linear programming. And so you end up with a billion by billion matrix, which the joke was, by the time you figured out the allocation matrix, it would take so long, it would already be into next year's planning cycle. So what happened in reality? Well, bureaucrats just dispensed resources on their own. Well, if you're an entrepreneur, you want to make a new product, how do you get it? Well, the resources are very hard to get. In the United States, if you can afford it, you just go to the store and just buy it. If you want to start mixing and matching components to build your own creation. Like with Silicon Valley, the big .com bomb was, or boom, I should say, before it became a bomb. All these businesses are started, Steve Jobs and Apple and a whole bunch of people, a lot of these businesses started in people's garages because they can go out to Tiger Direct, order whatever electronic products that they wanted, formulate it and create their own prototypes and go to Wall Street and get big money investment for it. But those products wouldn't exist unless they were made for something else. So when you goes from the tactical to practical and starts to go through the military purchases and I mean intelligence community, because the NSA and the other agencies are the ones buying the eavesdropping equipment that take the cutting edge electronic devices to do it. But when those parts become available, they become available, for the other businesses to buy, and then they make more of them, they get cheaper, and then eventually they get a consumer product, and the government declassifies that old technology and moves it on. But when that cycle goes around and consumers are buying it, it spends the technological growth cycle because it feeds on itself, because these new industries keep on evolving. So you talk about the evolution or the sectoral development of the Western economy grew much faster than the USSR. As soon as they liberalized on the economic system, that's all Gorbachev wanted. But once he started the liberalization, then the USSR fell apart. I never said that they voted on it. What he wanted was to liberalize his economy and move back to some kind of market system, so these tactical to practical feedback loops could spin faster. And now it is. Now I didn't want to get, I could talk about this for hours. I was trying to stay out of it because we got other stuff to do.
Pause you for a second. Yeah, we've got a ton of things. We've got a ton of things to get through today, and we'll probably be doing 2-3 recordings. But for the first time in Working Brother Talks history, I looked up a reference to an older talk live during the recording, and it is episode 43, so Working Brother Talks 43 with George, that discusses tactical to practical and that cycle. I will leave a link somewhere here. But that's a new one. Also, movie recommendation. I watched this the other day. This is Fly Me to the Moon. Well worth watching for all the fans of the Kubrick type movies, and some alternate history possibly. It was like 7 out of 8 maybe for Hollywood. Not bad, but I definitely recommend watching it. George, you want to get into a cliche before we listen to that third quote? No,
go ahead.
Who works the most? Turns out that Serbs and Turks pretty much take the lead, with the Greeks close behind and the Bosnians in terms of hours. So much for being lazy, eh? George, no?
Oh, I don't care. I mean,
you have no opinion on the subject of laziness of Eastern Europeans, or the meme thereof. No?
Oh, I mean, I just traveled through Eastern Europe. I see. The thing is, if some people work at a job, but then they, they're growing and tending their own garden at home and producing some of their own food and stuff like that. I mean, that doesn't get counted in the official statistics. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they could be working 40 hours at a job, and then, because I'm just talking about when I go through Macedonia and Serbia. Yeah, I see a lot of people, doing a lot of their own stuff aside from their paid job. So, mm-hmm. How do you factor those things in? Yeah, it doesn't always really go by statistics. And if you're growing your own food, then you're not eating that genetically modified crap that we are over here. So it has its benefits.
There's all kinds of things to be getting, trying to avoid. Let me play the rest of this thing.
The family, the origin of the family, private property, and the state is where he talks about the Christian aristocracy is a big extended family version of the patriarchal family, and you have to switch that over to atheism and socialism so you can return society back to a matriarchal system. So yes, under socialism, a single parent mother is the ideal form of government, and everything needs, not just a husband needs to support her. The whole state is to support her. So you're changing the whole government system to raise single mother families. That's what you're.
But you're talking here about generally the idealized leftist state, not necessarily the USSR or current US, right?
Oh, go back to what I said. Okay, I realize I'm talking about a book I read literally 3 decades ago, and I got to like really kind of in my memory to it's a long time ago. But I was talking about the book, private, Engels, the family, private property, and the state.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the book, the way leaders implement it or don't implement it in the different communist experiments. It's different from the USSR. It's different than how the Romanians implemented it. Joseph Tito did something totally different. It's different in either place.
Joseph Tito. I've never heard him called Joseph Tito. That's hilarious. Josip Broz Tito.
I read it in English.
I've never heard him called Joseph. That's hilarious.
Oh, I read it in English. I'm not,
it's just funny. It's just funny.
Yeah, well, my pronunciation of the books, of the names of the books, the names that are in the books I read, I have no idea. Yeah, I just read the books over here in English. So I'm probably mispronouncing and botching everybody's names right and left, but at least, whatever.
Considering we're all over the place with the topics now, and we'll probably leave that slideshow for later.
Communism was supposed to be an internationalist movement.
Mm-hmm.
The paradox is almost everybody used it. Almost all the leaders of communism actually used it as a nationalist movement.
Mm-hmm.
So in effect, most leaders actually, in the strictest terms of the books, were really practicing National Socialism.
Yeah.
You look at
also known as no Germans, right? Or Italians. Well, technically, kind of both.
Well, no, I'm not even talking about that. I mean, I'm talking about Ho Chi Minh. He was a nationalist. He was a Vietnamese nationalist. He wasn't an internationalist. Same thing with Pol Pot and Yang Seri in Cambodia. They were pro-Khmer nationalists. Cambodians are Khmer. They were nationalists. Same thing with Mao. Well, China's different because you have so many different ethnicities living in China. But yeah, he's more Han Chinese. He's more of a Han Chinese.
Not anymore. I think they're officially like 90% Han now. Officially, and like everybody's just I'm Han too.
They pushed the non-Han went into Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar.
That's another.
Yeah. So wherever, whatever Marx and Engels wrote, it was never the internationalist communism. That never was actually what was implemented. What was implemented was nationalist socialism.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, as the books were written and as the ideologues tried to implement it, something else way differently occurred in reality. But when you get into Fabian socialism, they thought, it was going to go through the stages of, you go from aristocracy and feudalism to capitalism, then capitalism collapses and you move to socialism, and then society gets prepared to go to full communism of everybody works and shares, and you have, central planning, because there's the perceived advantages to central planning. Of course, then when you get back into Plato and Aristotle, when you have an ideal state, what does it take to maintain it? Well, ideal states hardly ever come about. And why is it? Because it's human nature. And once leaders get into power, they always end up favoring their offspring. So everything ends up into nepotism. And why, does everything end up to nepotism? Then you're back into domain-specific evolutionary theory. And Marxist communism then operates off of a domain general, infinitely malleable premise, where the leaders are supposed to get past these evolutionary drives, but they don't. They go back to favoring their family members. So the evolutionary drive is strongest. So you get into all these things, where you look at how they tried to implement communism and then what actually ended up occurring. You're back to the argument of Plato and Aristotle, where Plato in the Republic, the first several books, he's asking, what is justice? How do you achieve it in society? Importance of the education system. So you're back to the 7P again. Then how do you raise the leaders? How do you raise the elite leaders? How do you keep them from becoming corrupt? Again, the corruption is always to favor your offspring. Well, yourself and then your offspring. And then they want to perpetuate your offspring to keep, to stay in power. So then you have, well, what's the difference between a corrupt aristocracy and a non-corrupt aristocracy? Well, then you get into Aristotle's proper and perverted forms, where he calls the aristocracy or the monarchy a proper form. He calls the, plutocracy, or for Plato's forms, or if you get into Aristotle called his perverted forms, tyranny, despotism, and oligarchy. Well, what do? They're very narrowly, the perverted forms are very narrowly focused to supporting their family only, and their offspring. And the aristocracy on the Aristotelian side is more helping society as a large. So how would, when we get into the frameworks here, what's the difference? Well, what's the difference between the proper and perverted forms of elites? The elites will have an elite mass bond, and that's indicated by they'll invest more in their society, so their Gini coefficients and their multiplier coefficients will increase. So when you get back into communism, the investment cycle, it doesn't matter. Well, they can't really invest in society because they don't really have private property. And then the velocity of money doesn't increase the tactical to practical cycles, because everything is massively slowed down by the central planning. So you get into a whole bunch of problems of why it's dysfunctional on different levels, but the way you measure it and understand it is by that tactical to practical cycle. How fast does that spin? How fast does your velocity of money spin? In the USSR, it didn't spin at all. So their production of goods wasn't high enough to match the amount of currency that they had in circulation. They call that overhang. When the USSR ended, a lot of people had, a whole bunch of rubles stored up that they couldn't spend because there weren't the goods on the shelves. So if people had a lot of extra currency that they couldn't spend because there's no goods, well, that means the velocity of the ruble, instead of velocity of dollar, velocity of ruble, that means it wasn't cycling through the economy. Why isn't it cycling through the economy as fast as it was in the West? Then you're back to the tactical to practical cycles. The feedback loop didn't cycle as fast enough. Then why did that happen? Well, you're back to the central planning issue, and you're back to all the issues that Mises and Hayek talked about in the 1920s in the socialist calculation debates. So the fall of the USSR proved Mises and Hayek correct, because none of those things occurred. Hence they have a different system. Now that they have a different system, guess what? It's spinning pretty quickly now, isn't it?
George, I got a comment.
Yeah.
As somebody who went to the American and British school system as a Eastern Bloc person, one could say.
Yeah.
Even though we were technically non-aligned. A lot of your approach and generalizations and swabs seem to have an air of Western nonchalant approach to the, how can I say, slightly subsidized the collapse of the USSR. Like, it didn't happen, by accident. It didn't happen because, in a perfect system, in a vacuum, like with zero external factors. You know what I mean? Same goes for
right
Yugoslavia.
Now talking about one thing. We're not talking about the existing, rivalries within the system.
Mm-hmm.
The different cultures in the system, and the other different conflict. I mean, we're just talking about just that one. Well, it's not a one economic angle. We're talking about the difference between, endogenous growth theories, and then you're talking about the difference between export-led growth cycles, which again, the Soviet Union as it transitioned into the free market system wanted to use their energy as an export-led growth factor to pump back into their society. Certain investors after the collapse of communism got into power, and these oligarchs started owning everything in the East Bloc and started putting their money back on Wall Street and the city of London. So they never got.
But again, you're approaching it as if like these oligarchs were just happened. These oligarchs were like put in by the Clintons. You know what I mean? Like, it's a comedy show.
We don't want to get nuked off the channel.
There's no nuking. There's no nuking. It's a comedy show. Nothing here has anything to do with reality. Just like this thing, you mentioned the aristocrats earlier, and the higher echelons of society, and I had this queued, so I had to play this. I don't know if you saw this. Did you see this? This is the higher echelons of society. Watch this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Get some help. 7. Gets more help, and finally gets it done.
Wait,
who's that?
Yeah,
that's probably the best possible reaction you could have had. That's the king.
I'm not into all that.
That's the king.
If you get into the Shadowland 500-day plan, which was run by the Harvard Kennedy, the Shadowland 500-day plan, the shock therapy program to move the Soviet Union back to a market economy.
Never heard of it. You're going to have to enlighten us briefly, and then we'll go into it another time, like in detail, but enlighten us briefly.
No, we're not going to go into it in detail, because if we went over on Rumble or another channel, we could get into it in detail.
We might. Why not? Could be a Rumble exclusive. I do have...
Move it over to BitChute. But
anyway,
if you look at the Harvard economists that enacted that, there's a reason why Jeffrey Sachs is the only one that's actually speaking out against it. So yes, I know that the oligarchs were installed. Yes, I know that. Yes, I knew that decades ago, and the problem is being corrected slowly but surely.
Oh, it's constantly being corrected in the Eurasian continent. One could say that.
We can
George,
say that. We can say
we've covered. We've covered.
We can go over. We need to go over the Russian strat plan again, because not enough people know what's behind that. Or I can go through it in a couple of hours, but it's also predicated on people that know enough about the different type of economics theories of, endogenous, domestic growth, and then how you strengthen that with export-led growth strategies. Different countries are going to have different leading sectors. Okay, obviously, Russia's got tremendous amount of resources, but they need to get the money for it and then develop other leading edge sectors, which if their profits keep on getting exported back to the West, which is a problem that's being rectified, then they can never internally develop. Because somebody wanted me to listen to a Russian guy that just came into the United States illegally, and he's talking about, well, the Russian economy hasn't advanced in the last 30 years, and he doesn't know why. He doesn't know why it's engineered that way by the City of London and Wall Street to make it that way. So that issue, he just knows it is, and he actually blames it on Putin, who's actually trying to re-internalize his profits.
A lot of people in Serbia like that too, man. Although hopefully most of them left. A lot of people like that in Serbia, although hopefully most of them left by now.
Yeah. Well, it's a problem, because once they put the oligarchs in charge, then they keep on exporting the money to the West. As long as they do that, then the Eastern Bloc, can't economically develop, so they've been stuck. And some oligarchs have been uncooperative, and they've managed to fall out of windows and off of roofs or have other accidents.
We'll get into BRICS and the alternative financial solutions. We'll get into Putin getting to Mongolia, a landlocked country between Russia and China, as Soviet Russia there points out, and we'll get into some other things. But first, I want to flash this up in front of you. Flash being used here. This is the Swedish Army, Swedish Armed Forces. Yeah, no. I don't know what to say, man. Would you join the Swedish Armed Forces if you saw this ad? Would you defend this? Would this ad make you join?
I would probably be less inclined. Well, I'm past the age of conscription. So
in your prime days, no, still no.
I would use. Let me put it this way, because we got to be politically correct here. I would use different face paint colors to camouflage better.
This is a Japanese volunteer who went to work in the Donbass, and he says most of Japan are pigs who just complain about people who think. That's why I came to Russia, because I wanted to die like a warrior, not die like those pigs. And I think we can leave that quote as the ending quote for this talk. What do you think, George? I think that sums it up basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be back immediately to continue recording. But for people it might be a day or two, maybe a recording or two. Everyone, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Leave a comment. Ask George a question. We'll get to them sooner or later. All right.
Yeah.
George, say bye to everyone so that we can come back immediately.
Bye, everyone.
All right. See you later.